Chapter 6 Ivan and Abdul, in which the Grasshopper defends his definition by entertaining and then rejecting the possibility of there being a game with no rules. Ivan and Abdul, I began, had been officers of general rank before each was retired and elevated to the post of ambassador in the backwater capital of Rien-à-Faire. Both had established brilliant military careers in the service of homelands which had frequently been at war with one another, and Ivan and Abdul had in fact been opposite numbers in many engagements. So the two warriors were overjoyed at the opportunity their appointments afforded them for going over all their old campaigns together. But after a few months, when they had reviewed all the victories and defeats from every possible angle and refought all the old battles under every conceivable modification of logistics and tactics, they grew weary of their reminiscences and sought other diversions. Sport seemed an obvious pastime for a couple of shelved warriors to take up, since sport seemed to them to be a kind of substitute or polite kind of warfare. It soon became evident to them, however, that sports were like warfare in only the most superficial respects. Specifically, they found that sports were hedged round with the most outrageously arbitrary restrictions. In golf, for example, you were expected to use a golf club to get your ball out of a sand trap, even when your opponent could not see what you were doing. And in tennis, you were expected to call a ball foul or fair honestly, even when your opponent was not in a position to check your call. Chess was no better, since surreptitiously to alter the location of pieces on the board, obviously an effective tactic, was ruled out. But since they could find nothing better to do to occupy their time, they continued to play these games, although, as the diplomatic colony to its delight soon became aware, with a difference. Whenever the rules could be broken without detection or retribution, they were broken. Although this approach was ultimately doomed to failure, it worked very well for a time, and a number of breathtaking refinements were added to most of the conventional games. Thus, to golf was added, among other things, the use of self-propelling, radar-controlled golf balls, and to chess the use of hallucinogenic drugs as an offensive weapon. On the tennis courts, Abdul achieved a much-admired coup by hiring two men to raise and lower the net at appropriate times, until this was countered by Ivan's introduction of the net-piercing tennis ball. Things reached their fated conclusion in a climactic chess match. In preparing themselves for the contest, both contestants had countered the possible use of drugs by taking suitable antidotes, and each was determined to keep a very keen eye upon the other throughout the match. The first game proceeded normally for 6 moves. Then, Ivan made the move which was the beginning of the end. Utterly ignoring the rules governing movement of the pieces, he illegally moved his queen to a square, which put Abdul in check. The fascinated audience waited breathlessly for Abdul's response to this outrage. It was not slow in coming. He simply removed Ivan's queen from the board and put it in his pocket. Ivan, in turn, was quick to respond. In a trice, he had nimbly rearranged the pieces on the board so that Abdul's king was in checkmate, crying, "I've won!" "Wrong, my friend," screamed Abdul, and gathered up all the pieces except his king. He flung them to the floor. "Abdul, you can't do that," said Ivan in outraged tones. "I won the game the moment you were in checkmate." "So you say," responded Abdul. "But you were obviously mistaken, for there stands my king, quite free to move." Ivan had not, of course, expected such a transparent tactic to succeed with the wily Abdul. It had merely been a diversionary move so that he could, while his opponent was momentarily distracted, secure Abdul's king to the board with the quick-drying glue he had all along held ready in his hand beneath the table. Then, of course, before you could say scimitar, Abdul snatched a bottle of solvent from his tunic and freed his king. Ivan's hand immediately shot out towards the king, but Abdul grabbed his wrist in time to forestall the assault. For a full minute, they were locked in a frozen tableau of force and counterforce, evoking spirited applause from the audience, before they broke apart, leapt from their chairs, and began to circle each other warily. Then they joined battle in what was to become a truly mythic contest. For they fought all that night, 'neath the pale yellow light, and the din it was heard from afar. Huge multitudes came, so great was the fame of Abdul and Ivan Skavar. The legend then incorrectly goes on to recount the game as ending in a tie with the mutual destruction of Abdul and Ivan, followed by some sentimental reference to a tomb rising up where the blue Danube flows, and to a Muscovite maiden her lone vigil keeping 'neath the light of the pale polar star. But that is all the most obvious kind of bardic invention and ornamentation. The game did not end in a tie, but in a stalemate, when both fell to the floor in utter exhaustion, unable to move, and when it was discovered that one of the spectators had made off with the board and the pieces. In fact, the two friends met the following afternoon at their favorite cafe. Said Ivan, "My friend, that was the best chess game I've ever played." "Oh, unquestionably," replied Abdul. They drank their aperitifs in companionable silence. Then Ivan spoke again. "Still, there is something that bothers me." "Indeed," said Abdul. "Perhaps you know the same thing is bothering me." "I shouldn't be surprised. If you are thinking what I am thinking, you will have realized that it will be impossible for us to ever play chess again." "Just so. The instant of setting out the pieces for a game would be the signal for us to start a battle whose weapons had nothing whatever to do with chess, since the only moves either of us will accept are moves that really coerce, either by force or by deceit. For since we will not abide by the rules of the game, the winner can only be he who has gained final mastery of the situation. And of course it is not only that we can no longer play chess. For the same reason we can no longer play any game, for games require that we impose artificial restraints upon ourselves in seeking victory, and we refuse to do that." "Exactly," said Ivan. "When I had my brigade and the general staff used to issue their namby-pamby orders in the name of military honor, I swore that if I was ever chief of staff I would root out all that kind of thing. Rules of war, indeed." "What about gas? You wouldn't have used gas, would you?" "Of course not. But not because I wanted to play the game. Gas is too risky for the user, as you well know. And besides that, only an idiot would intentionally invite that kind of retaliation. The same with nuclear bombs, of course. Refraining from leading with your chin isn't chivalry, it's basic strategy." "Still, artificial restraints do have their uses. Oh, not in war, mon vieux. I agree with you there. But an awful lot of people do seem to play chess and golf, without getting into a brawl."
"Civilians, old boy, civilians."
"What about all the officers who play golf at the country club?"
"Jumped-up civilians. Good candidates for the general staff."
"Still, Ivan, look at all we're missing. I sometimes wish I could play by the rules."
"Wishes don't cost anything, Abdul. The question is, can you play by the rules?"
"I suppose not."
"Of course not. We are what we are."
"Then it looks as though we'll have to go back to reliving our past glories for the rest of our days. Maybe it's time just to pack it in, Ivan, as a noble Roman would have done."
"I don't think it has quite come to that, my friend."
"You have an idea, Ivan, I can tell."
"A germ, Abdul, a germ. I'm going to sleep on it, however. Tomorrow at the same time."
"Very well, till tomorrow."
Next day, Abdul found his friend already seated at their table at the cafe, smiling broadly at the tumbler of vodka before him.
"Tell me your idea at once, Ivan,"
said Abdul, seating himself at the table.
"At once, my friend, at once.
I have thought about it all night and most of the day, and I am satisfied that the logic is absolutely compelling. There is one and only one game left for us to play.
What game, Ivan? What logic?
A fight to the finish, my friend.
What? Ivan, you must be mad.
On the contrary, it is demonstrably plain that any other alternative would be imbecilic. We have seen that for you and me, no game can be won by either of us unless he has complete mastery over the other. We cannot add, as civilians do, complete mastery in terms of the game, because that means in terms of the rules of the game, and we do not acknowledge such rules. Thus, the other night, when I, in defiance of the rules, summarily arranged the pieces so that your king was in the position of being checkmated, the civilians would say that I had not really won the game because I had not achieved the state of affairs by following the rules. Is that not so?
Yes, certainly.
And we, too, found that I had not won the games, but for quite a different reason, n'est-ce pas?
That's right. You had not won the game because you were unable to hold your position.
Yes, so we may say that when civilians win games, they are always looking to the past, for all they care about is how they got there. But for us, once we have achieved a success, what matters is not how we did it, but whether we can sustain our position. We are always looking to the future.
That's quite well put, Ivan.
Yes, and that is why the only kind of game we can play, Abdul, is a fight to the finish.
I'm afraid I don't quite see that, my friend.
Well, we are agreed, are we not, that for you and me, victory consists in mastery of one of us over the other, regardless of the game that is being played.
Yes, we are agreed on that.
Well then, Abdul, let me ask you this. In any game we choose to play, or in the game, since there can be only one game for us, how long must one of us have mastery over the other for such mastery to count as winning?
Well, Ivan, why couldn't we just assign an arbitrary time limit? 5 minutes, a day, a week. It doesn't really matter, does it?
Abdul, you're not thinking. Your solution of the problem posed by the fact that you and I cannot play rule-governed games is to invent a rule. What kind of solution is that?
Yes, I see. That is, if my suggested time limit is in fact the same as a rule.
But isn't it perfectly clear that it is? I immobilize your king for, let us say, 5 minutes by gluing it to the table and holding you at bay with a revolver so that you cannot apply your solvent. At the end of the 5 minutes, I pocket my gun and declare myself the winner. Surely you're not going to tell me, my friend, that your response would be to congratulate me on a game well played.
No, Ivan, I am not. I would immediately draw my weapon and hold you off while I applied the solvent.
Of course you would. Because for us, a past victory is worthless unless it can be extended into future domination.
So the answer to the question, how long one of us must dominate the other, is that it must be forever.
Just so. And since by domination we mean freedom from attack by the one dominated, it is clear what efficiency, in achieving domination, if I may put it that way, demands, is it not?
It is. No one can be sure that he is safe from attack by an opponent unless the opponent no longer exists to attack him.
Therefore, my friend, since we know that we cannot play a game that has rules, it follows that if we are to play a game at all, it must be one without rules. And a fight to the finish is the only game without rules that there is. QED.
I agree, but are you serious in suggesting that we act on this conclusion?
I'm entirely serious. And what are the alternatives? You yourself just yesterday were entertaining the possibility of committing suicide. Is that preferable?
No, it isn't.
There is a thoughtful silence at length, broken by Abdul with a laugh. What is it? Said Ivan.
I was just thinking, the French are supposed to be the most logical thinkers in the world. But I think only you Russians, Ivan, are crazy enough to act on the basis of a cogent chain of reasoning no matter where it leads.
Then you do not wish to play this ultimate game?
On the contrary, I am quite prepared to play it. It is just that if I had been left to myself, I doubt that I am kinky enough to have actually made the final commitment.
Yes, well, that is why the world has never heard of Turkish roulette.
No, nor Russian delight either. But tell me, have you yourself ever played Russian roulette?
Not lately. The General Staff and the Foreign Office frown on general officers and ambassadors amusing themselves in that way. but as a subaltern I used to play it all the time.
And are alive to tell the tale. You must have been fantastically lucky.
Luck had nothing to do with it. I always palmed the bullet. But enough of this. I am keen to begin the game. Will you be ready to start at dawn tomorrow?
Quite ready.
Then, since each of us no doubt has some preparations to make, I will take my leave of you, Abdul. Farewell.
Farewell, Ivan.
If, replied the Grasshopper, Ivan's and Abdul's proposed fight to the finish is a game in which there are no rules that prohibit more efficient in favor of less efficient means, then my definition must be too narrow. The definition can be defended, therefore, only if the fight to the finish is not a game or else has, in fact, the kind of rules the definition requires. And since I am quite willing to accept that their fight to the finish is a game, evidently I must show that, unbeknownst to Ivan and Abdul, their game did indeed contain at least one rule of the required kind. And I believe that I can show just that simply by asking you, Skepticus, to consider the following question. Why didn't Ivan destroy Abdul immediately upon committing himself to a fight to the finish with him? He could easily have done so while they were talking things over in the cafe, but he did not. Instead, quite unaccountably, he proposed to Abdul that the game begin at dawn on the following day. Let us awaken Ivan just before dawn on the appointed day and put this question to him. Ivan, are you awake?
I am. Who is it? What do you want?
I am the voice of logic, and I have a question to put to you.
What time is it?
An hour before dawn.
Put your question then, but please be brief.
The question is a short one. Why didn't you destroy Abdul just as soon as you had decided to have a fight to the finish with him?
Here is an equally short answer, because I have no interest in destroying Abdul per se. I am interested in seeking to kill him only so that I can be battling him.
Let me test the allegation if you don't mind.
Test away.
Very well. I tell you that Abdul is at this moment fast asleep in his bed. You can easily gain entrance to the embassy and kill him in his sleep, thus winning the battle with a minimum of risk by stunning surprise attack.
As you can see, I am not leaping from my bed and speeding to the embassy.
Yes, I do see that, and it puzzles me very much.
I don't see why it should. If I kill Abdul before the game starts, then I can't very well fight him, can I? If I killed him now, our game could never begin.
You are saying that this game you are going to play has a starting time.
Of course.
In other words, there is a rule which forbids you to make a move in the game before a certain agreed-upon time.
A rule, you say?
Yes, responded the voice of logic inexorably. A rule.
Then,
said Ivan, frowning and sitting up in bed,
our fight to the finish is not really a game without rules.
Not if you stick to your dawn starting time.
And I thought we had finally found a game without the artificiality of rules. How could we have missed this business of a starting time?
Perhaps it was because you were so busy eliminating an ending time. But it is perfectly clear, is it not, that a starting time is just as much an artifice as a finish time?
Yes, it is.
And now that you know this, you will of course at once sneak up on Abdul in his sleep and kill him, right?
Not at all.
Why not?
I have answered that question twice already. Damn it. I don't want to murder Abdul. I like him, for God's sake. I just want to play a game with him.
Yes, I understand that. And you also want to play a game without rules that artificially limit the means at your disposal for achieving victory. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is.
Well, now that you see that a starting time is such an artificial limitation, why don't you play this game that you have at last correctly formulated and go and kill Abdul?
Because with the elimination of a starting time, I have also eliminated the possibility of there being a game at all.
Why is that?
Well, the game Abdul and I propose to play is a contest, is it not? But the game cannot be played unless the contestants actually contest. Killing Abdul in his sleep would be just like slaughtering an opposing football team before they reach the stadium and then claiming that you had won the match.
So accepting the limitation of a starting time is the same as ensuring that you will have an opponent. That is, someone who is prepared to attack you as you are prepared to attack him.
Precisely. If that were not inherently part of the idea of a competitive game, then I might just as well have killed Abdul 2 days ago before the idea of a fight to the finish ever occurred to me. Or, for that matter, I might just as well have killed some chance person and then claimed that I had triumphed in a fight to the finish. But there is no victory in killing some unsuspecting victim. Anybody can do that.
In other words, just killing Abdul does not count as winning the game, for that goal can also exist aside from the game, as in the case of murder.
Yes, winning consists in killing Abdul only under conditions that mean he is also in a position to kill me, and where both of us know that it is kill or be killed. That is the whole meaning of an agreed-upon starting time.
Would you agree with the following general account of what you have just said? You are attempting to achieve a certain state of affairs, the death of Abdul. Using only means permitted by a rule, both of you must know at the same time that each is out to kill the other. Where this rule prohibits more efficient in favor of less efficient means, it would be much more efficient to achieve the death of Abdul without issuing a challenge and receiving an acceptance. And where, a point not now in dispute, the sole reason for accepting the limiting rule is to make possible such activity.
Yes, that describes the situation perfectly.
Well, if you are prepared to play such a game, I don't see why you aren't prepared to play any game. If, that is, you are prepared to accept what might be called an unnecessary obstacle in order to be able to play this game with Abdul, why not accept other unnecessary obstacles and play chess or tennis or golf with Abdul instead, and give up this folly of a fight to the finish? Either that, or admit that there is no reason to wait for the starting signal and kill Abdul now. There is silence as Ivan turns this over in his mind. Then he leaps from his bed, flings on his clothes, and rushes wildly from the room. "Where are you going?" cries the voice of logic.
I must reach Abdul before dawn,
cries Ivan from the staircase. "To call off the game, or to kill him?" disjunctively queries the voice of logic. But Ivan's shouted reply is too muffled to understand as he rushes pell-mell through the dark and deserted streets. Nearly halfway to Abdul's assembly, Ivan sees a figure approaching at the opposite end of a short boulevard. It is Abdul. Has Abdul too been listening to the voice of logic? And is he hurrying to Ivan to call off the game? Or to make a surprise attack? If Ivan can be sure that Abdul is making a surprise attack, then it is no surprise and the game can begin, for it has gained a starting time and the time is now. But how can Ivan be sure that it is now unless he knows what Abdul's purpose is? And Abdul may, of course, be in the same quandary. Ivan might shout, "Let's call off the game," but Abdul might very sensibly take this to be a ruse on Ivan's part for gaining an advantage. And Ivan, if Abdul called out the same proposal to him, would be foolhardy indeed to accept it out of hand as a genuine offer. Both stop in perplexed indecision. And there they stand to this very day, in the form of two marble statues facing one another along the length of the boulevard impasse in the capital city of Grasshopper. At least that is the story the guides of Grasshopper tell to explain the sculptured confrontation along Embassy Row.
I must say, I said with a laugh when the Grasshopper had finished, you have fitted my illustrative tale with a startling denouement.
To be sure. But the question is, Skepticus, are you persuaded that all games must have the kind of constitutive rule which the definition requires?
Almost, Grasshopper, almost.
But not quite.
Well, even if the saga of Ivan and Abdul shows that competitive games must have at least one such rule, it does not show that non-competitive games are bound by the same requirement, and presently I shall raise an objection on that score. First, however, I am compelled to raise an objection which, if sound, would appear to undercut and render futile any attempt whatever to give a rational account of competitive games, thus making your present defense of constitutive rules irrelevant even if it is not unsound.
Good heavens, Skepticus, is there such an objection?
I'm afraid there is, Grasshopper, for it has been argued that competitive games are fundamentally paradoxical undertakings. And since to be paradoxical is, I take it, the same as to be inexplicable, it would seem to follow, if the argument is cogent, that a definition of competitive games is impossible.
Yes, that would surely follow. For when we discover that something we have been trying to understand is really a paradox, then reason compels us to abandon the quest, just as it would if we were seeking perpetual motion or a merciful banker. But I wonder, Skepticus, if you're thinking of Aurel Colnai's address to the Aristotelian Society titled Games and Aims, in which he argues for the thesis that you have suggested.
That is so, Grasshopper. I have just finished reading it in the Society's published proceedings, and it seems to me that Colnai makes a rather plausible case for his position.
Yes, well, as it happens, I too have read the piece and have, in fact, prepared a brief response. In fact, I have it with me, for I intend to send it off to the Entomological Review. If you would like to accompany me to the post office, perhaps I could read it to you on the way.
By all means, Grasshopper.